The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
And where we are met with cynicism and doubt, and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the very first Shift podcast, where we're really trying to shift away from the mainstream media. I'm Jake Mercier, and I'm here with my co-host, Secret Stacy. And Secret, do you want to kind of explain a little bit more about why we're doing this in the age of so many different podcasts out there, why we decided to make our own, and also just a little bit more about yourself?
One of the main things I see and find myself the most concerned with is the uncivil discourse. And the thing is, I see it as an enormous lie. There is such a push from every point on the spectrum to pick sides and to fight for your political beliefs. And I think I'd just like for people to realize that that mostly isn't true. We aren't fighting socialists or conservatives or mainstream this or that because they want to ruin America or they want to ruin the social fabric. We really aren't fighting with the vast majority of people at all, if we think about it, at least not the things that matter. I mean, when it comes to the things that matter, everyone agrees. Everyone agrees. Everyone wants better schools for their kids and a living wage and affordable and quality health care. Everyone agrees we should have less crime and less drug addiction and more jobs and clean water and air. The issues come when we start to kind of dissect the ways in which we believe it is best to accomplish these goals. But that's been drowned out in this uncivil discourse. And that's what we want to change. We want people to understand that we are all after the same thing. That's the starting point. From there, we can talk about what we want and what we can do to best solve these issues or to achieve these goals. Now, we might not agree on how to make things happen, but we sure ought to be able to agree that we want good things. We ought to be able to talk nicely to one another and to strategize together without all the toxicity that we've been seeing.
Right.
I think one of the really important things is to start listening to other people and to start listening to real people and not political pundits, but real people. I'm mostly a stay-at-home mom. I fit into that niche that the political pundits like to call the college-educated suburban woman. We're a pretty typical Southern family. I'm 33 years old. I've been married for 13 years. I have 4 kids at home, ranging from 6 years to 11 years. We have 2 dogs and a cat and a goat. I coach my 2 daughters' gymnastics teams. I homeschool my 2 youngest kids. I'm a writer. I'm an artist. I'm a furious reader of all things.
It's true.
Yeah. But I'm also a Christian and a conservative, but I don't identify with any political party necessarily. I am a registered Republican because that has been the party that has, in my opinion, had the best ideas recently. So I've been participating in their primaries, but I never vote one party down the ballot. In this past election, in the midterms, I voted mostly for independents. I probably voted 30% for Republicans and about 20% Democrat in that election. I'm a conservative, Jake's a libertarian, but we love to talk America and we love to talk history. And I just love that this podcast is going to give us the chance to explore those worlds a little deeper. I'm pretty excited to be a part of this conversation.
That's great, and I loved your intro about your family and really the importance of kind of getting this everyday American viewpoint that we're missing so much in the media. You turn on the TV and they're talking about things like Russia and all of these issues that are so far away from families that are just trying to make it through the day and get their kids to school and put food on the table. And I think that hopefully we can kind of give a different perspective in that way and really open up a conversation from people who aren't always locked in to what's happening in Washington. And so a little bit more about me. I am a college student at the George Washington University. I've been going here for about one semester so far, and it's definitely interesting being up here in the swamp and living up here and kind of seeing some of the dynamics. But one of the main things about me is I kind of grew up thinking, well, of course, I have to be a Democrat. I have to be a liberal. I have to be X, Y, or Z because of these certain things.
Do you think that it's because you're a millennial?
Of course. I think there's a big push and a pressure on social media and just socially to think a certain way on a certain number of issues. And I was definitely feeling the pressure in high school whenever I joined the Young Democrats. I started out joining the Young Democrats, and there was we were watching the debates between Trump and Hillary, which feels like yesterday, but now it's what was it? Almost 3 years ago now, 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're sitting there listening to the debates, and right, I know, right?
It was
and
a
we're sitting here
election cycle.
Definitely, and we're sitting there talking, and I shared an opinion that, Hillary. And while there are some opinions now about Trump and his ties with Saudi Arabia, Hillary at the time, she had been taking a lot of money from Saudi Arabia and those types of people through the Clinton Foundation. And I decided to just share my opinion that maybe that was a bit hypocritical considering the different human rights abuses and things that were happening in Saudi Arabia. They stone women for being raped. They throw gay people off roofs and things like that. And I made that thought just because I thought it was interesting and I wanted to have a better conversation. And I was really shunned from the group and kicked out of the club because I wasn't following the mainstream view of supporting a candidate blindly because they're a Democrat or because they're a Republican. And ever since then, I've really tried to kind of delve deeper into the issues and learn more. And today I think I really identify more with kind of libertarian viewpoints, but just like Secret, I don't think that I quite fall in line with any party. And so that's kind of about a little bit about both of us and kind of about where we stand on the issues, just so you can understand kind of our viewpoint. But today we're going to start off talking about an issue or a news story that has been pretty prominent lately. It was broken by Vanity Fair. So there's been chatter that the Trump administration, officials within the Trump administration, have been thinking about possibly taking Mike Pence off the ticket and running in 2020 with a different candidate, namely Nikki Haley. Her name has been thrown around.
This is very interesting to me for a variety of reasons. I think that everybody realizes and has realized for years that Nikki Haley has presidential aspirations. She's been extremely hush-hush about this. But when she was first given the role of ambassador to the United Nations, everyone knew that she needed foreign policy experience. She was the governor of South Carolina. She served 3 terms in the South Carolina House of Representatives. She was extremely popular, extremely successful politician, a rising star in the GOP, and she had no foreign policy experience at all. The ambassadorship to the United Nations was really seen by everyone as a stepping stone for her. What is so interesting to me about this is that they are replacing Mike Pence. Mike Pence joined the Trump campaign at a time when no one in the GOP wanted to touch the Trump campaign, and he was able to coalesce the Christian evangelical vote and push President Trump over the finish line. He deserves enormous credit for kind of riding out the Trump train, and it is very interesting to me that they're going to replace him just because I feel like a lot of people are going to feel like he deserves to be there. However, it does make sense politically because that Christian evangelical vote is solidly back under the GOP tent. And so Nikki Haley provides the draw to the college-educated white woman vote that Trump is that it's dwindling.
So the history of this is interesting. Franklin Roosevelt was the first president, not the first president, but he holds the record for the most vice presidents. So, which was 3 during his presidency, which was obviously longer than most presidents get, than any other president has gotten. And then for another example, Richard Nixon did have 2 vice presidents, Spiro Agnew, and then of course Gerald Ford, who went on to be the president when Nixon resigned. And so, although this isn't something new, it's something that definitely doesn't have very much precedent, and it's something interesting to hear about. But something that I've really noticed in the era of Trump, though, that's really interesting is that there's so much news every day that stuff like this that would be such a big deal in the Bush administration or the Obama administration really isn't getting that many headlines, just because there's so much news that comes out. But I did want to touch on a point that you made, Secret, that really the Trump administration, I think, is realizing now after the midterm elections that a lot of people are saying we're a red wave, or some people say it was a blue wave or a blue trickle, that a lot of suburban areas are shifting away from the Republican Party and shifting away from Trump, namely, especially suburban white women. And I think the Trump administration is realizing that trend. I also think that some of this chatter about Mueller is not helping necessarily Mike Pence and what's going on there. But also, as we'll talk about a little bit later, John Kelly resigning and Mike Pence's chief of staff coming into the picture. So I think there's a lot of variables here, but I think the main one is that the Trump administration is realizing that they have this evangelical base and they're not going to go anywhere, and they haven't gone anywhere. Trump's approval rating has been fairly steady, around 45 to 50%, and that base isn't going to go anywhere. But what are they going to do about these suburban districts that are slowly moving to be more and more blue?
Yes, they absolutely have to do something. Nikki Haley brings so much to the table. She is a woman. She is a minority. Her parents are immigrants. One thing that's really interesting to me also is that her and President Trump split on such amicable terms. This is something that we have not seen. They seem to have a great camaraderie. They get along well. And so it's not really a surprise that she is popping up in this capacity.
Right, and I did want to say, though, I completely agree with the fact that they split so amicably. It just seems like something that was so planned, because it seems that every other person that leaves the Trump administration gets kind of Trump's wrath and fury as the weeks and months go on. You know, something that was really funny to me, but it's funny, but it's also funny because it's Trump, and then you realize that he's the president and it's not so funny anymore, was his tweet about Rex Tillerson, saying that he didn't have the mental capacity needed, that he was dumb as a rock, he couldn't get rid of him fast enough, that he was lazy as hell. This is all in one tweet.
Oh my
He really packs it in there. He really gets the information in one tweet really well. He uses the full amount of the 240 characters perfectly.
The spats between President Trump and his appointed officials have actually been a shame, I think. These outrageous statements he makes are covered by the news. And when you do something that could be celebrated, like you have an 83% increase in MS-13 gang arrests or 4 million new jobs, these things tend to get lost in the shuffle. If he would walk the more professional path of circumstances concerning the dealings of the country are constantly changing, these are high-stress jobs, etc., that would probably yield at least a better perception. Instead, these breakups have been very dramatic, very public. The tweet about Rex Tillerson I just thought was frankly disgusting. I think this is one of the times that he just really needs to figure out how to rein himself in, because his very good policies and the good things that he's doing are not being recognized because he continues these outrageous and outlandish things.
And you know what I think is so interesting is what you just said almost completely, perfectly encapsulates what so many people are realizing that white suburban women are saying and what they're feeling and why they're moving away from Trump. I personally am a fan of Nikki Haley. I would love to see her in the spot. And I really think that Republicans and Democrats would benefit from this. You know, Democrats are continuing on this kind of idea that they want to impeach President Trump or possibly impeach President Trump. And then I don't know if they've really thought about it, that they're going to have Mike Pence, somebody that is known to believe in gay conversion therapy and a lot of other, he had a lot of anti-LGBT laws that drove so much business out of Indiana when he was governor and really wrecked the economy.
I always thought that it would be the most hilarious of ironies if the Democrats ended up giving us the most conservative president the nation has seen in generations.
Right.
It was an
and every day now it looks like that might be more of the case.
Party.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's one thing about the Democratic Party that I wish they could change, because I really appreciate a moderate Democrat, and I vote for moderate Democrats. I think that if the Democratic Party had better foresight, that would be that's probably the thing that they lack most right now, is they do not understand the long-term implications of a lot of their decisions.
Right. Well, and I wanted to kind of build on that, and you know, we had planned to talk a little bit about John Kelly resigning, but I really want to just build on that and talk a little bit about, you know, these factions that are in the Democratic Party. It's so interesting, and not only suburban white women are kind of the problem for Republicans coming up, but also the Rust Belt. Trump did take the Rust Belt and won those electoral votes, but as you know, those states were won by very thin margins, and in the midterms, they really, in many cases, went back to be a little bit more blue. And so I think that there's these rising factions in the Democratic Party, and here's what I think that they are, and you can push back if you think that they're a little bit different. But I think that you've got the economic progressive side, which Bernie Sanders, I think, has been leading. Tulsi Gabbard, who you may know, she is a representative from Hawaii. And then kind of Elizabeth Warren. I think that after what happened with some of the controversy that really kind of brought the left and the right together with regards to some of her comments on her Native American heritage or lack thereof. It's true. Well, there's kind of the economic progressive wing that focuses a little bit more about the economy and healthcare and a lot of issues that is actually resonating with people in more rural areas, which is very interesting. There's kind of this idea of better healthcare and a brighter future and more focus on economic policies. And then you have the kind of identity politicians, which are Kamala Harris and Kirsten Gillibrand, of course, coastal elites. And the final faction, I think, is the kind of Rust Belt Democrat, which is Amy Klobuchar, a senator from Minnesota, Joe Biden, who I think kind of is in there with the identity politicians, but he also can get those Rust Belt votes. And then also Richard Ojeda, who is running, he was a state senator in West Virginia. He's now running for president, and he actually voted for Trump in 2016. He comes from a coal mining community in West Virginia, and I think that he represents a whole different side of the Democrats that brings a little bit of that, you know, Bernie Sanders economic progressive kind of flavor into it, but also really appeals to these Rust Belt states and these coal miners and people who are in these communities. So I do think that there are these three distinct factions that are forming, and I think that they're going to have to pick and choose which way. Well, there's also Beto O'Rourke, which I don't think really fits into any of those three. But I think they're going to have to choose where they're going to go going forward, and I think that they're going to try and capitalize on some of these weak points of the Trump presidency, which are kind of the Rust Belt slowly shifting back in the blue direction, and also the kind of the waning support of suburban white women.
Yeah, me too.
Great. But really, what do you think that Trump's strategy should be in 2020 if he wants to beat the Democrats. And what do you think that the Democrats' strategy should be if they want to beat President Trump?
I think that the Democratic Party has got to move back to the center. I would love to vote for a Democrat if they would move back to the center. The fringe politics, I think, has to go. The identity politics has to go. I think that 2020 should be about issues and not about personality. And I think that the Democratic Party is going to benefit if they edge themselves away from that left fringe, that left ultra-progressive socialist fringe.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think that unfortunately there's going to be one side fighting fire with fire, and we're going to get a lot of he said, she said. And, you know, you made a point about the Democrats kind of not talking as much about identity, but also going against the personal attacks and talking about the issues. And I also think that goes with Trump and the Republicans as well. I think that, you know, so a lot of the Republican Party wants to talk about the issues, but I think that Trump should really be doing the same and cut it out with the personal attacks. And I know that is 100% wishful thinking. And so it's hard to talk about these things and suggest that the Democrats do a certain thing when at the same time Trump is doing a lot of those same things, and kind of, you know, Trump stokes identity politics, from my view, in a different sense. I mean, he stokes identity politics in the sense of you know, identity in other ways, whether it be with, you know, immigrants, and whether or not it's the complete the best assessment of how he does it. I think that a lot of people on the left view his statements on immigrants and illegal immigrants to be stoking a different type of identity politics. And so I think that in 2020, we really need someone to talk about the issues. I actually really think that Amy Klobuchar could be Trump's worst fear. And it's pretty interesting because I think a lot of people are overlooking her. She appeals to that area where Hillary Clinton completely lost. You know, we're talking about these Rust Belt states. And at the same time, for the most part, she's a pretty issue-oriented candidate. And she's been working a lot across the aisle with a bunch of Republican senators on a lot of major legislation. And I think that she may be Trump's worst enemy when it comes to 2020, if she does decide to run.
There are a lot of things that I like about Amy Klobuchar. I think that she seems very pragmatic, and I like someone who is willing to be a little flexible as far as where they stand on certain issues and on their beliefs, depending on the information at hand. And so I can respect that about her, and I do like that about her. A couple of things that I'm not necessarily thrilled about are that, for one, she has not really provided voters with her exact positions on a lot of key issues, okay? Of course, she's probably doing this because she's running for office again. But that leaves voters largely in the dark about several key issues. She does support federal spending as a means of promoting economic growth, and I like that. She does not support lowering corporate taxes as a means of promoting economic growth, and I do not like that. So there are kind of things that I can get on board with Amy Klobuchar, and things that I don't really like so much. But a candidacy like hers does not scare me like somebody like Cory Booker or Kamala Harris. You know,
or I would add to that list Kirsten Gillibrand.
Yeah. The people that do not support lowering taxes for economic growth. They don't support Social Security. People being able to put a portion of their Social Security into their own personal retirement accounts.
Yeah, I think the thing about those economic issues is, you know, we can talk about Trump and the way he speaks and the way that he conducts himself a lot, and we do talk a lot about that. But I think that some of those issues that you're talking about, these economic issues, when people go in and cast their vote, they're thinking about what's going to help them the most at home. And
right, people vote with their pocketbook.
They vote with their pocketbook. That's so true. And is that the best thing? Is that I think it's just a fact of the way that we are designed and the way that we're made as humans. I think it's just the way that we think as humans. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. I just think that that's the truth of the matter.
Well, you're going to vote as a person to put somebody in office that is going to help better your self-interests, and that's not a bad thing. When President Obama was in office, he made some decisions that directly negatively impacted our whole town, that directly negatively impacted our
economically
families, that had devastating effects and impacts to small business owners, people that we know that built businesses over decades, that almost ended up having to file bankruptcy because of his policies. And so these are things that were directly related to the decisions that the President of the United States made. They would be fools to vote for a third term of that. And you can't ask them to or expect it. Talk about the Democratic Party, or not necessarily just the Democratic Party, but a lot of progressive women in the Democratic Party like to kind of coin the phrase that people vote against their own self-interest when women vote for Republicans because of things like the abortion argument and things of that nature, women's health care, etc. Voting for Democrats, if it negatively impacts your family's financial standing, is voting against your own self-interests. And that's what happened since President Trump was elected. These things have been largely turned around. One thing that I do want to point out is that even though I am extremely unhappy and not looking forward to a Cory Booker, Kamala Harris presidential run, even though I completely disagree with them on all sorts of policies that they have, I can still find common ground with them because, like we said earlier, when we started this, they have the same end goals that I have. It's finding that common thread. Kamala Harris doesn't support mandatory sentencing for nonviolent drug crimes. I think that's fantastic. I can get behind that. I can support her in that. Cory Booker is pro school vouchers. I am not saying that I'm pro school voucher, but I am saying that there definitely needs to be some sort of reform done in the education system. And so this is something that I could get behind and agree with as far as a Cory Booker presidency is concerned. And so just because I don't agree with some of the things that they've done, such as, Cory Booker voted no on the affordable drug bill that would allow people to get drugs in cheaper from Canada. He wants a tax increase in order to balance the budget across all tax brackets. These things I'm extremely unhappy and weary of, but that doesn't mean that I can't find common ground.
And I think that's something that you can extend to other people too, like Kirsten Gillibrand and Bernie Sanders. I think that the main thing in starting to have these kinds of conversations is not to demean their motives. I think that's one of the worst things that you can do is to demean someone's motives. Me and Secret are cousins, but we're also best friends. And we have had incredible conversations. We've also had fights where we have felt really passionately about some way on some issue. And I think that the reason that we're so close is that we know to take out each other's, we never impugn each other's end goal. I never have once accused her of not wanting to do the right thing for other people or not caring for her neighbor. I think that one of the worst things in politics is accusing people of having bad intentions. I think that a lot of these people have really good intentions. I think that they're just going about it in the wrong way. Or in some cases, like you mentioned in a lot of these, some of these policies that they have pursued in the right way. And we're about to actually talk about Trump and criminal justice reform and some of the things that he's done wrong, some of the things that he's done right, and where we actually kind of agree with the left and libertarian viewpoint a lot more. And so I think the main thing to take away, though, is that we are best friends. We talk about politics every day, and we're family, and we're able to kind of have that relationship because when she has a great argument and she makes it, I say, wow, you know what, that was really good. She made a great argument to me about 2 years ago. I remember having this really, we had a really passionate conversation about minimum wage. And she was able to change my mind. And, I hope that I've been able to change her mind on other issues, or at least over the years kind of push in one direction or the other. But that's because we're having
evolving,
right,
constantly evolving viewpoints.
Right.
Which you can't have
that's
if
something
you don't
that I
take
appreciate. I think it's so important for the future of our country.
Opinions from other people.
Right. Yeah. Not dismissing them offhand just because it's coming from a certain person that you don't like. And I respect that about Secret, and I think that that's something that will help our podcast move forward. And, we're coming at it from the perspective of this is what our viewpoints are. We're not shy about what we believe, but we're also not afraid to, change our viewpoints or present information from our viewpoints so that people that are listening know kind of where we stand when we're sharing our facts and information. And we don't act like we know everything for sure. These are off-the-cuff opinions based on the news, and we want to be able to kind of share it from a perspective of people that are everyday Americans.
Yeah, I think that it should be much easier for people to put aside the differences that they have or the dislikes that they have with somebody based on their personality and look at what it is that they are actually willing to do.
But anyway, moving forward, I think kind of tying in what we were talking about a little bit, what you were saying, Secret, about Kamala Harris, I think that this new criminal justice reform push, and if you haven't heard about it, Donald Trump has been pushing a criminal justice reform bill that he wants to get in before the Senate goes home for Christmas break and until the whole new Congress comes in. So, frankly, so they can get credit for passing this when the Democratic House isn't there and when it's Republican House and Republican Senate. And this criminal justice reform bill has been pushed. Jared Kushner has urged it to go through. Trump has really taken up the mantle, especially on Twitter, in trying to make sure that we get that done. And there seems to be some problems with Mitch McConnell saying that it may not be able to be passed feasibly by the end of the year. And then you have Democrats and also libertarians like Rand Paul coming out and saying, no, they can just attach it to the spending bill and they can push it through. And so we're seeing kind of a fight go through, but we've even seen people like Ted Cruz come out and say that the Senate should take up and pass this legislation. And so we're actually seeing a lot of bipartisan work here. And I appreciate what you said about Kamala Harris and a lot of these other Democrats and kind of their ideas regarding the legalization of marijuana and a lot of these other policies that would be a step in the right direction for criminal justice reform. But I want to turn it around to you and ask you, Secret, do you think that this kind of criminal justice reform can happen in the Trump era?
Well, let's talk about the legalization of marijuana. Right now, people tend to say that this is a major reason for over-incarceration. We know that the money spent on inmates is staggering. It's about $30,000 per person annually. And in 2016, we had 587,700 marijuana arrests.
Wow.
Now, those people are not being
just in 1 year?
Incarcerated. That's in 1 year. Wow. There's actually somebody arrested for marijuana possession about 1 per minute, which is just crazy. The issue, though, is, if we're talking prison reform, is the over-incarceration, right? We are trying to figure out why our prisons are so full. What's going on with these for-profit prison systems, and how do we reform this system that we have in America, because it's obviously not working. So here's where we're at. A lot of people are shouting about this legalization of marijuana, and I do think that it should be legalized, or at the very least decriminalized, and I don't think that people should be in jail for marijuana possession. But you're talking about, out of 2.3 million prisoners in the United States, you're talking about less than 0.5% of those people being imprisoned for marijuana possession.
Well, I think you also have to think about
is this a
nonviolent
problem?
drug offenses, but yes.
Yes, but is this a problem because of marijuana? No. Now, here the thing though is that so you have 21 to 25% of your people that are in prison currently or being detained. So this is also the state jails and the county jails. You have 21 to 25% of those people who are incarcerated because of drug-related crimes. Now, only 3 to 4% of those people are incarcerated for some sort of a non-violent drug possession crime. 3 to 4%, okay? So if we take all of these people out of jails and we just released them, this is really not going to put any sort of a dent. I mean, you're talking 3% of the prison population that falls under these two categories. This is not why we're over incarcerated. The biggest portion of the prison population is locked up for violent crimes, okay? This is 41% of the people. Almost 1 million inmates are in prison for violent crimes, okay? So here's where it gets a little bit dicey, and here's where the big controversy with this particular bill comes in. Sorry, let me gather my thoughts for a second. You're on pins and needles.
Yeah, I just can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Oh, okay. So what we have to do is obviously rehabilitate people, right? There is, of course, a controversy with these 42% or 1 million people that are violent criminals. Okay, these are people that you can't just release back into society. There's some argument about the rate of criminal activity decreasing with men after they get out of their 20s, and so even though someone commits a violent crime in their 20s, they should still be able to be rehabilitated. There's a lot of controversy with the Bill Clinton bill and the crime bill that he passed with the 3-strike system. This system said was that if you committed 2 violent crimes that were violent felonies, and then you were released, and if you committed a 3rd violent felony, it was a mandatory life sentence for a 3rd violent felony. I mean, one could argue that this is not an unreasonable thing, right? For 3 violent crimes. So let's push those 42% kind of aside and out of this equation for right now, because that's very controversial. I actually read a stat today that said that from the argument of violent offenders being released back into the general population, that these people should be rehabilitated because less than 1% of people that have committed homicide commit another homicide. This is a real statistic.
Wow.
Did you hear that? I didn't even know what to think about that one, but I had to mention it. I thought it was worth the mention that less than 1% of people that have committed a homicide that are released commit another homicide. Anyway, pushing those 42% aside and dealing with the other 48% of the prison population in this new crime bill, that the prison reform bill deals largely with reforming and rehabilitating these criminals so that they can be productive members of society. That's the big shtick with this bill, which it sounds fantastic on the surface. The controversy comes in when you realize that the private for-profit prison system in the U.S. is plagued by corruption.
Right.
So basically, the country's largest detention company is called the GEO Group, okay? This company is lobbying on behalf of this bill. They want this to pass. So
Interesting.
That's weird,
That's interesting.
right?
Yeah, that's
It's
really
very
interesting.
The reason that they want this to pass is that they have just expanded their company to include rehabilitation services. So you have a for-profit prison company who is now going to also offer for-profit rehabilitation programs. I'm not saying that they have nefarious motives, but I'm not saying that they don't. If this goes through, it's going to require tremendous oversight.
Exactly.
This company, the GEO Group, has been embroiled in controversy. They are known for having substandard living arrangements inside these prison systems. Their prisons are dirty. People have gotten sick there. They had one youth prison that was shut down and called by a federal judge the worst and most abhorrent thing they have ever seen in the nation. They shut this prison down and moved these kids out of this facility and into another. But they had another prison where they were basically giving the mayor or the governor, I think it was the mayor of this town, they were giving him kickbacks, financial kickbacks. They were giving him money to sentence kids to jail time so that they would fill beds in this youth prison. This guy was eventually convicted of this and sentenced to over 20 years in prison himself. So this GEO group, this is very controversial, and it's understandable that senators like Marco Rubio are being very mum on this entire bill. You know, they're not coming out to support, not really condemning the bill either, just being very hush-hush on what it is that they're going to do until we have some more information. And so I just think the whole thing is interesting. Like I said, I don't know if their motives are nefarious or not, but if this goes through, it will require a tremendous amount of oversight.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it really is true, though. When you look up this crime bill, you can't quite find the specifics. You don't know what the outcomes of this bill will be like. And it's so interesting to hear that. If you want to delve deeper into this issue, and it is an issue that I'm sure we'll talk about for many podcasts to come, I'm hoping that this bill is actually a step in the right direction. Obviously, it really only starts to chip away if it's being presented in a correct way, if it will actually improve the system. But I think that it's something that Democrats and Republicans can agree on. And I think there's a lot of people that are still kind of going along with the Nixon law and order viewpoint and the whole 3 strikes you're out things, and we're really stuck on that when we should be talking about so many issues like the ones that you just presented, Secret, that are bipartisan, something that we can do together. And I think that if you really want to look into this and learn more, there's a great documentary called 13th. It's on Netflix. And it's absolutely incredible. It deals with this issue, the history of it, how we got to where we are today. It's not just an issue of talking about percentages of people that are in for violent crimes, but it's also, how did we get here? Why are these people committing these crimes? And what can we do about it going forward? So that is definitely your homework. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you didn't think you'd get homework, but you need to go watch that documentary. It's incredible. And Secret, I'm going to make you watch it too. But anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody who listened to this podcast. But before we go, we just want to pay our respects and just say a few words about former President George H.W. Bush, who served his country admirably. And Secret, I think you had some things that you wanted to say before we end today.
I think I could just always appreciate the legacy that George H.W. Bush left after leaving office. This is a classy guy. He was a kind and gentle leader. I know that he took a lot of flack during his time as president for being kind and gentle, but I always just thought that he was a good man and a good person. He was extremely successful, probably the most successful politician of our lifetime. And I don't think he really got the credit for that while he was alive. I always thought it was a shame. This came to light a lot during the 2016 presidential election when President Obama and several other people would make comments about Hillary Clinton being the most qualified candidate that America has ever seen. And I just remember always scoffing at that and saying, No, George H.W. Bush was the most qualified presidential candidate America has ever seen. This guy was in Congress. He was the head of the CIA. He was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. He was ambassador to China. He was an extremely successful business person before he ever went into politics. He served for 8 years as vice president. I just don't think that there has ever been anyone who's been more qualified to hold the office of president than George H.W. Bush was.
I think that's a great point. I do want to mention, though, Hillary Clinton was extremely qualified. It's very true. Doesn't necessarily mean she would have been the best for the job. She was very qualified.
No, she was very qualified. Yes, she was absolutely very qualified. I just do not think that she was the most qualified by a long shot. Right. One of my favorite George H.W. Bush stories, if you have never heard it, you should look it up on YouTube. It's a story that Kevin Costner told a story on Jimmy Kimmel. Was it Jimmy Kimmel? That where he had this incredible day and he got to meet with President Bush, and it's a very cute and endearing story, and so you ought to plug that into YouTube and watch it. Also, of course, they have that very dramatic footage of him being pulled from the ocean when he was in the military. That's also incredible, but something that I think is pretty neat, he was extremely involved in the planning of his funeral. I visited the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library a little while back, and this was before Barbara had passed away, and they had his grave and her grave already ready. He had organized and orchestrated everything, and they had it, ready to go for whenever those two went home. They did a lot of very unconventional and symbolic things, such as having his old staff come and fly back with him for his last flight on Air Force One. He wanted to be taken by train to his final resting place at the library so that people could come and see his casket. There were several things that he did. It was incredibly moving, the funeral service. The eulogy that President George W. Bush gave was incredibly moving.
One of the things that stuck with me in watching that, he said, quote, "To us, he was close to perfect, but not totally perfect. The man couldn't stomach vegetables, especially broccoli."
And that was a trait he passed on to all of his children.
It was incredible, and it's so true. George H.W. Bush, they weren't perfect. They made mistakes. We can go through and look through, the decisions they made and all these kinds of things. But he was an honorable man. He served our country. He loved our country. And that's something that I think needs to be celebrated and really was celebrated beautifully this past week. And it was really incredible to watch.
I think history will remember George H.W. Bush as a good man. And you just can't ask for more than that once the ride is over, to be remembered as being a good person that walked with integrity, that loved his country, that committed his life to public service. You just can't be remembered in a better light and in a better capacity. I think that history will be very kind with George H.W. Bush.
We just want to say thank you so much for tuning in and listening to our podcast, keeping an open mind and realizing that we're not political pundits. We're everyday Americans just like you, trying to break down the news. We'd love for you to like this video, like this podcast, and leave us a comment about your opinions on the biggest matters of the news today. And this has been the Shift Podcast, shifting away from mainstream media.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
And where we are met with cynicism and doubt, and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can.